Deep beneath the screaming streets of Jerusalem, in the summer of 1099, something far older than the crusade was being disturbed. While the world above burned in the fires of a holy war, a group of men who officially did not exist were descending into a darkness that had been sealed since the dawn of time. The stone beneath the city does not keep secrets. It buries them under layers of silence and pressure, waiting for those foolish enough to dig. On this day, the foolish were the elite of the Byzantine Empire, the Varangian Guard. They were not common looters or desperate pilgrims, but axe-bearing giants from the icy reaches of Scandinavia and the Kievan Rus, men of iron and salt. Yet as they moved through the absolute darkness beneath the ruins of the Temple of Solomon, their legendary courage was beginning to fray like a rotted rope. They had been sent on a mission so sensitive that their names were struck from the official military rosters of Constantinople before they even left the palace. Led by a veteran commander named Sigurd, a man who had survived a dozen bloody campaigns from the Caspian to the Mediterranean, they sought something the Emperor Alexios feared more than the advancing Turkish armies. As their torches flickered against the weeping walls of the subterranean passages, the air grew thick and heavy, tasting of ozone and ancient dust. The tunnels here were not built by crusader hands, nor by the Romans before them. The masonry was seamless, the angles unsettling. They were navigating a labyrinth of forbidden geometry where the shadows seemed to move independently of the light. When they finally stumbled upon the central chamber, the silence was so absolute it felt like a physical weight. The room had remained sealed since the days of antiquity, a pocket of preserved time. Sigurd held his torch high, revealing walls carved with symbols that seemed to shift when viewed from the corner of the eye. A fusion of Norse runes, ancient Hebrew, and scripts that predated any known language. There was no gold here, no jewels or silver plates. Instead, in the center of the room sat a series of heavy, iron-bound chests, wrapped in weathered leather. But it was what lay beneath the chests that stopped Sigurd's heart. The floor was etched with patterns that suggested the laws of physics and time were not as stable as the church taught. It was a map of a reality that was indifferent to human existence. The moment they breached the seal, the atmosphere changed. A low, rhythmic hum began to vibrate through the very soles of their boots. It wasn't a sound heard by the ears, but a resonance felt in the marrow of their bones. It was as if the earth itself were breathing, a slow, tectonic inhalation that had been held for millennia. The men, usually loud and boastful warriors who feared no mortal foe, became unnervingly quiet. They handled the chests with a reverence that bordered on pure terror. Sigurd, once a man of booming laughter and violent certainty, looked into the shadows of that chamber and saw something that shattered his understanding of the world. He recovered a small, darkened piece of parchment from a stone plinth, a document that would eventually become his death warrant. The journey back to Constantinople across the Mediterranean was marked by a series of unsettling events that turned the seasoned crew of the transport ship into a mass of shivering nerves. The risks were no longer just the sea or pirates. The danger was now internal, carried in the hold. The animals on board, war horses and hounds meant for the imperial stables, refused to go near the cargo. They would bay and kick at the wood until their hooves bled, driven by a primal instinct to stay away from the chests. During the dead of night, the sailors whispered that the ship was no longer moving through water, but through a thick, viscous silence. The rhythmic hum from the temple continued, vibrating through the timber of the deck, synchronized with the pulsing of the stars. Sigurd stayed in the hold, refusing to sleep. His eyes grew sunken and dark, fixed on the iron locks of the cargo. He was seen clutching the darkened parchment, his hands trembling so violently that he could barely hold his water skin. He began to speak in a low monotone, not of the gold they would spend or the battles they would win, but of the fragility of the world. He told his second-in-command that the empires of men were merely ants building mounds on the back of a sleeping leviathan. His men, the most loyal warriors in Christendom, no longer looked like soldiers. They moved like ghosts, their hands never straying far from the hilts of their axes, guarding the chests as if their own souls were trapped inside, or perhaps as if they were guarding the world from what was within. When they finally arrived at the great palace of Constantinople, the reception was not one of triumph, but of profound apprehension. The Emperor Alexios I Komnenos did not greet them in the throne room under the gaze of the court. Instead, he met the survivors in a private, windowless chamber in the bowels of the palace, away from the prying eyes of the high clergy. The logs of the palace guard for that night mention that the meeting lasted until the first light of dawn. When the doors finally opened, the emperor, a man known for his unshakable stoicism, appeared visibly shaken. His face was a mask of pale exhaustion, his hands hidden within his silk sleeves to conceal their shaking. The contents of the chests were whisked away by a select group of eunuchs, men who had no families to tell and no tongues to speak, and hidden within the deepest vaults of the imperial treasury. Immediately, the shift in imperial policy was jarring. Resources were suddenly diverted from the frontiers, where the empire was crumbling, to reinforce the city's internal defenses. But these were not defenses against an invading army. The emperor was ordering the construction of lead-lined walls and the sealing of ancient sewers. He acted not like a ruler protecting a city, but like a man trying to contain a contagion that was already lurking within his own borders. The tension between the Varangian guard and the church began to manifest in chilling ways. The Patriarch of Constantinople, the highest religious authority in the East, grew increasingly concerned about the spiritual health of the men who had returned from Jerusalem. They had stopped attending the divine liturgy. They refused to cross themselves. There were rumors that they were practicing strange, archaic rites in the privacy of their barracks, using blood and salt to trace patterns on the floor that matched the carvings in the temple. Sigurd was no longer the pious soldier the patriarch remembered. When forced to stand before the icons of the saints, he looked at them with a cold, detached expression, as if he knew a truth that rendered the gilded images obsolete and hollow. This was the ultimate conflict, a realization that threatened the very foundation of the empire's authority. If these men had found proof of a history that predated the established doctrines, the monopoly over the divine held by the church would be at risk. Paranoia began to seep through the palace like a slow-acting poison. The emperor realized that the secret was too heavy for his soldiers to carry and too dangerous to be allowed to exist in the minds of men who could speak. The systematic effort to silence the group began shortly after. Historical archives from this period are curiously fragmented, with entire sections regarding the Varangian Guard during the early 12th century having been carefully excised by imperial scribes. One by one, the soldiers who had entered the tunnels beneath Solomon's temple began to disappear. Some were sent to remote, desolate outposts on the borders of the empire, places like the burning sands of the Levant or the frozen marshes of the north, never to be heard from again. Others were accused of heresy, a convenient charge that allowed them to be quietly detained in the deepest dungeons of the city. Sigurd himself was the last to go. He reportedly spent his final days staring at the sea, telling anyone who would listen that the world was not a creation of divine order, but a fragile shell over a reality that was indifferent to human existence. He spoke of the great wrong found beneath the temple, a truth that would one day resurface when the world was old and tired. The official explanation for the guard's decline was a loss of discipline, but the timing was far too precise. The nature of their discovery remains one of history's most enduring enigmas, shielded by a wall of institutional silence. Some researchers, piecing together the few surviving fragments, suggest that the Varangians found ancient texts that detailed a version of human history that the Church found entirely unacceptable. A timeline where humanity was an accident, not a design. Others believe the chests contained an object of such immense psychological power that it threatened the sanity of anyone who gazed upon it for too long. Whatever was in those chests, it wasn't gold, it was information. In the medieval world, as in our own, information was the most dangerous currency of all, capable of dismantling an empire without a single sword being drawn. As the years passed, the legend of the Forbidden Guard grew in the shadows. It was said that a few members, including a young soldier who had served under Sigurd, managed to escape the purge. They took with them fragments of the truth they had unearthed, small pieces of the darkened parchment and sketches of the shifting runes. They became a ghost unit, moving through the fringes of society and leaving behind strange symbols in the dust of old ruins. These symbols, often resembling a fusion of Norse runes and ancient Hebrew script, have been found in disparate locations across Europe, from the catacombs of Rome to the isolated fjords of Norway. It suggests a desperate, centuries-long attempt to preserve a secret that the center of power was determined to incinerate. The conflict reached its peak when a fire broke out in the private library of the Patriarch, shortly after a group of hooded men, moving with the precision of trained warriors, was spotted near the cathedral. The fire was said to have burned with a strange bluish hue that resisted all attempts to extinguish it with water. It consumed documents that dated back to the earliest days of the faith, turning centuries of theology into ash. Some believe the fire was not an act of vengeance by the remaining Varangians, but a final desperate attempt by the Church to destroy the last evidence of what had been brought back from Jerusalem. If the authorities could not control the secret, they would ensure that no one could ever find it again. The blue fire was the funeral pyre for a piece of history that had become too heavy for the world to carry. By the time the Fourth Crusade reached Constantinople in 1204, the story of the Varangians and their discovery had been reduced to a campfire tale. The city was sacked, and many of its greatest treasures were stolen or destroyed. Yet, among the looters, there were reports of individuals searching for something specific, not the gold of the emperors, but a hidden vault rumored to be located deep beneath the foundations of the great palace. They tore through the stone and marble, driven by a map that supposedly traced back to the time of Alexios. They found nothing but empty stone and cold earth. The secret had either been moved long ago or had successfully vanished into the ether of history, leaving behind only the echoing silence of those who had died to protect it. The risk of pursuing such knowledge is often portrayed as a noble quest, but the story of the Varangian Guard offers a more grounded perspective on the consequences of curiosity. They were men of action, hardened by war, who found themselves entangled in a web of theological and political intrigue they were never meant to navigate. The conflict wasn't just between the guards and the church. It was a conflict between the known world and a reality that refused to fit within its borders.
Let's check out the
When we look at the ruins of
I
ancient
heard
temples
they are
today,
ancient.
we see monuments to faith, but we rarely consider them as lids on a box that was meant to stay closed. The Varangians didn't just open a door, they saw what was behind the curtain, and the weight of that sight eventually crushed them. The silence that followed the disappearance of these men is the most telling piece of evidence. In an era where chroniclers recorded every minor skirmish with obsessive detail, the sudden and total void regarding the elite protectors of the emperor is a loud, ringing alarm. It suggests a coordinated, multi-generational effort to rewrite the narrative, and ensure that the risk posed by the discovery was neutralized by the simple act of forgetting. But memory is a stubborn thing. The stories persisted in the north, whispered by the descendants of the Guard, telling of a great wrong that would one day resurface. Consider the possibility that the world as we understand it is built upon a foundation of convenient omissions. The Varangian Guard found something that didn't belong in their time, or perhaps something that didn't belong in our understanding of time at all. The danger wasn't in the object itself, but in the realization that the structures governing human life, the laws, the religions, the hierarchies, might be far more fragile than we dare to admit. The moment Sigurd and his men stepped into that chamber, they ceased to be soldiers and became liabilities to the very order of the civilization they served. They were the first to realize that the history we are taught is often just a shadow cast by a much larger, much darker truth. Today, the tunnels beneath Jerusalem remain a site of intense study and high tension, with many areas still restricted. The official reasons are always practical: structural integrity, political sensitivity, or the preservation of heritage. But for those who know the story of the Varangians, these justifications feel like echoes of an old, ancestral fear. The risk of uncovering something that contradicts our fundamental beliefs is a danger that transcends centuries. We tell ourselves that we are seekers of truth, but there are some truths that once seen can never be unseen. Their weight might just be enough to shatter the delicate balance of the modern world, just as it shattered the elite guard of the Byzantine Empire. The legacy of the Varangian Guard is found in the quiet spaces of history, in the stories that were never allowed to be finished. It serves as a reminder that the past is not a static record, but a living entity that can still reach out and pull us into the dark. The conflict between the desire to know and the need to control is a struggle that defines the human experience. As long as there are hidden chambers and buried secrets, there will be those who risk everything to find them, and those who will do anything to ensure they stay hidden. We are perpetually standing on the threshold of a chamber we aren't supposed to enter. In the end, the story of what was found under the temple is a story of the thin line between enlightenment and ruin. Sigurd and his brothers were not destroyed by an enemy army, but by the weight of a secret they could neither understand nor discard. They moved through the halls of power like ghosts. Before they truly became ghosts, their presence a constant reminder that some doors are meant to stay locked for a reason. As we peel back the layers of our own history, we must ask ourselves if we are truly prepared for what might be waiting in the depths, or if we, like the emperors and patriarchs of old, would prefer the safety of the silence. The darkness beneath the Temple of Solomon remains, undisturbed by the passage of empires. It is a silence that invites questions but rarely offers answers. The men who once walked those halls with axes in hand and terror in their hearts are gone, their voices lost to the wind. But the secret they carried, the forbidden truth that once threatened to tear the world apart, is still down there, waiting for the next group of seekers to stumble into the light of a flickering torch. And when that day comes, the conflict will begin anew, for the risk of the unknown is the only thing more powerful than the structures we build to contain it. Every age has its forbidden knowledge, its hidden chambers that are better left unopened. The tragedy of these Norse warriors was not that they found something evil, but that they found something true, a truth that was simply too heavy for the world to bear.